Welcome to episode 3 of Impact Meets Innovation podcast. Today's guest, Matt Arrington, a man who truly defines what it means to be a man for others, the pioneer to such a purpose-driven company, Forte Strong, that is helping build healthier, happier, and stronger men in our world. Welcome, my guy. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Hey, so let's I did some research about Forte Strong, right? We've talked about it previously. So you guys have been going for, 15 or so years now?
Yep. Just about 15 years.
Okay, so what was the light bulb moment for you that something had to be done? Like this mission that you've been at for so many years now, like what was that initial light bulb moment for you?
Yeah. So that's a great question. For me, it was that, at the time, so if you go back 15 years ago or so, I had just finished grad school and, the economy wasn't doing like super, super well. And so I was picking up kind of some odd jobs here and there. And one of the jobs that I had was helping at a residential treatment center because I always have loved coaching. I come from a pretty broken family and didn't have like a dad around all the time. And so I attribute my success and my drive and a lot of the skills that I developed from positive male mentorship that I've had in my life. And so that's something that I've always really been into. And I was like, okay, maybe I can work for this residential treatment center just part-time and kind of share some of the, things and pass along the goodness that I've learned, right? And what I was seeing, residential treatment is typically set up for individuals who have a history of crime, sometimes even violent crime.
Okay.
They'll have severe psychological issues like schizophrenia or, some forms of psychosis. They'll have substance abuse issues and maybe even like sexual issues, right? They've like acted out in that type of way. And every now and then I'd see a guy come through who didn't have those severe of issues, right? And I'd talk to him and I'd be like, hey, Johnny, like, what are you here for? And he'd just kind of shrug his shoulders and go, I'm just kind of like, I don't have a lot of ambition. I've gone to college and it kind of was overwhelming for me. And so I went back home and I just ended up staying in mom and dad's basement. And so there was no history of substance abuse, criminal activity, no severe psychological issues. And society just goes, well, if you don't have those major things, then you're fine. And what I found is there's an entire group of young adult people and primarily young adult men who are floating right underneath the radar. They're not doing anything that is so, extreme that they're drawing a lot of attention to themselves. And
Right.
so throughout high school and their young or their older teenage years, like they just didn't get the attention that they needed, right? But they also weren't doing things to push themselves to develop a skill set and to grow individually. And so as soon as they turned 18, the world kind of goes, all right, you're 18, you're an adult, right? Time to be an adult. And they haven't developed a foundation or a skill set that allows them to be successful and to be independent. And so I was just like, man, these guys are coming through this residential treatment program. And what they're doing in this program is they're picking up all of the negative bad habits from the individuals who did have these more severe issues, right? They're learning how to like boost cars. They're learning how to like, score some drugs. They're learning how to pawn stuff to get money to kind of serve their vices. And they're coming out worse, right? Because they want to be accepted and they're in a different kind of like group of people who have more severe issues. So they're walking away with more severe issues instead of being helped. So I started doing research and I was like, this phenomenon, this whole failure to launch syndrome, just like the movie, right? Like, is it a big deal? Like, is it real? Right. And man, there was just no programs or, I guess college programs or anything that was helping these young adult men to be independent. And so what was happening for like a large majority of these guys, they'd go to college and they were very smart, right? Really smart, but didn't know how to socialize with their peers, didn't know how to talk to members of the opposite sex, didn't know how to have tough conversations because they weren't familiar with conflict resolution
Right.
or negotiation or any of that stuff. And so my former business partner and I just really was like, this is an underserved population. It's a very specific niche, but we see this problem as going to be more severe as time goes on. Because what they were doing is they were saying, life is too hard, so I'm going to withdraw and I'm going to, distract myself. We call that a developmental vacation. So I'm gonna take a vacation from developing into adulthood, and I'm gonna play video games like all day long or whatever. So that was
Yeah.
kind of the aha moment. Yeah.
Wow. That's really deep because, in today's day and age, social media technology it's bigger than it's ever been. And I'm sure that's just pouring gasoline on the fire to a lot of these kids and serving distraction. Now, when I do these episodes, I always like to go back to when we were kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you've mentioned in our previous conversations, and you just mentioned a little bit ago, your upbringing and how it shaped you. Shed some light on what that looked like and how that was a driving force, both positively and negatively, for you as a young adult, and how you've kind of flipped the script and can relate now to a lot of those kids that are going through the same things.
So my upbringing is pretty fragmented. I've moved over 40 times in my life. My parents got divorced when I was 4, and then each of them got remarried and divorced, remarried again. So I've lived through 5 divorces, right? Didn't have dad around. My mom was doing her best, going to nursing school, trying to get an education and support 3 kids and so forth. So for me, there was a lot of being left alone, right? Like I was your typical latchkey kid growing up in Southern California. Literally had like a key on a string around my neck, and we lived in an apartment. I'd go to school, come home with my little sister, and unlock the door and make us a meal or something. And so I really didn't have my parents loved me, right? But they were trying their best to just survive, and so there wasn't a lot of parental kind of coaching going on. And so for the most part, I raised myself. And if there was anything that I wanted, I didn't have access to resources, right? Like through our church at the time, they had this thing called the warehouse, and it was basically like bread and foodstuffs that were donated, canned food and powdered milk and stuff like that. Like we couldn't even afford like actual regular milk, right? And now I think like I love milk, man. I drink milk like water, and so now I had this like deprivation mentality as a kid, sugar cereal, like cold cereal. What's that, man? I never had like Captain Crunch. I loved my birthday because I always got to go buy a box of cereal that was just mine that I could eat, So there was a lot of just me figuring things out on my own, right? Like when I was in elementary school, there was some stuff that I wanted to buy. And, mom's putting herself through nursing school. My dad lives in a completely different state. And so what I started doing, and this is hilarious, like I would check the dumpsters in our apartment complex. And if there was anything that looked cool, I would literally dive in the dumpster, grab it, and try to go sell it. And so I remember one time finding, yeah, I remember one time finding this box full of these like cartridges. They look like Nintendo game cartridges. And I was like, I don't know what these are. And I was like, but they look like they're in good shape. And I was going door to door, knocking on doors in the apartment complex. And I'm like, hey, I'm selling these. And I didn't know what the crap they were. And people were like, oh, sorry, I don't have that player anymore. And then one guy's like, do you know what these are? And I was like, no. He's like, these are 8-track like cartridges. So like, this is how we used to listen to music, kind of like before tape cassettes even. And like, I didn't know, like I was just a small kid. So, but I did, like, I learned that like some people, even just, kind of like out of the goodness of their heart would be like, sure. Yeah. Give me 5 of those and here's a couple bucks or something, Yeah. And so I learned that like really early on, I could do things by myself and I didn't need, parents to do everything for me. So I started to become really independent. The good thing about that is obviously early on, I developed a problem solving mindset. So I've always like, as I've grown up, been like, okay, here's a problem. What do I need to do to fix that problem or to alleviate the stress associated with this problem? Right. The downside is obviously like not having that parental support and that feeling of emotional stability and love was hard for me. And so I became, as a result, like pretty judgmental and pretty closed off emotionally speaking. And so even throughout kind of like my adulthood and into my kids, I've been more that critical parent. Like, when my kids want something or whatever, I'm just like, well, go figure it out. And they're just like, my wife's kind of like, hey, maybe like, well, a little bit more compassion there, a little bit more like softness, a little bit more love. And that's something that like through personal therapy, like I've been understanding and going through a lot more, is how to be a lot more compassionate and understanding and non-judgmental. Like, for example, growing up in Southern California, I'd see homeless people on the street and I'd just be like, man, they're just lazy, you know? And that's pretty harsh. Like there's, for example, like most people, and I say most, well over half, and it's actually, there are some figures that say up to 71 to 72% of all people who are homeless are dealing with some sort of mental health issue. And so we never know, we can never put ourselves in someone else's shoes. Like, and anyway, so I just made a commitment to myself to be less judgmental, to be kind of more loving, and just help with what I've been blessed with, pass that along.
Yeah, that's great feedback, and man, I can relate to that so much. Both my parents were around for me growing up, but they were divorced, right? And I'm gonna get to divorced parents in a few minutes with the kids you see, but when you have divorced parents, there's always something that's missing, right? When you're with one parent or the other, or you don't see one parent altogether, right? And it builds this like back against the wall mentality that you're right, problem solving, and it gives you a responsibility that you're not quite ready for, or that specific age shouldn't be responsible for, right? And so when you're growing up, my parents divorced when I was young as well. I think around 3 or 4 years old, and it was me and my brother. And so we literally picked up and went to our mom's house, picked up, went to our dad's house.
Yeah.
And so we could never get into an emotional rhythm. Okay. And what you were referring to of like that nurturing that your parents give you, and the intimacy that you need in relationships, and the empathy that you need to show, that most people show, right? You were just lacking that. And I can attest to that because that has definitely shown up in my young adult, and then now in my life, in my marriage, in my friendships. And it's trying to unlock that. And right, like therapy and coaching and personal development, you start to realize where you're coming up short in your marriage or in friendships, right? And it all goes back to when we were kids.
Mm-hmm.
For you, I'm sure a lot of your kids that came in have divorced parents or have gone through that, right? What is the number one driver for them that you see? Is it the intimacy and the emotional, awareness aspect, or is it something completely different?
So are you referring to kind of like the reason that brings them in here?
No, what I'm saying is like the kids that you've came in contact with in your program that have divorced parents, do they all
Gotcha.
have very similar attributes from that we've experienced, or are you seeing it different nowadays?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm seeing it different nowadays. So parenting nowadays, it's a lot softer, right? So majority of the parents that I work with, that I see, and just parenting styles in general, is let's be more accepting. Let's be more open to what our kids want to do. Let's give our kids more control, which is a big issue, right? Because kids actually crave structure. All right. They need to know where the boundaries are. And that's why parents have such problems with kids in their twos and threes, because there's a developmental shift that occurs around 2 and 3 years old. There's an actual chemical reaction that occurs in the brain where their cognitive processing increases. And so what they do is they push boundaries, and they don't have the emotional capacity or understanding to be able to communicate what they're feeling. And so what do? They kick and scream and they throw tantrums. And so kids need to know, especially early on, where they can go and where they can't, right? So for example, don't go running out into the street, right? You're going to tell that to your 3, 4, 5-year-old. You can play out in front in the driveway, but you can't go into the street, right? And if they do go into the street, like parents sometimes go, hey, you can't do that. And they try to negotiate. And it's like, you can't negotiate with a 4-year-old, with somebody who doesn't have that emotional capacity yet, or that cognitive understanding. Like, they need a little bit of a spank, right? Or they need a little bit of kind of like a harsher reprimand, because that's dangerous. Like, that can cost them their life. And so parents are a little bit more afraid to hold strict boundaries, or to hold and I don't even want to say like strict boundaries, just boundaries in general. I'm seeing that lacking in a lot of family dynamics, right? And so when young men come into my program, and just to kind of clarify, I work with young adult men, and young adults are considered adults that are 18 to 26, right? And so these young adults come in and they're kind of like, they've been catered to, right? Their parents have given them so much like control or so much say in their life, that it's kind of like they've gone a little bit overboard. They're too nurturing. They're too, hey, what do you want to do? And the problem with that is that nowadays, because of internet and AI and cell phones and everything, it's like the gimme generation, right? In fact, they're calling it iGen, or the internet generation, because we can get information that quick. It's just at our fingertips. And so what that creates is a kind of like, I want it now and give it to me now mentality, right? And so kids who are growing up now, a lot of kids and a lot of young adults are just used to having things handed to them. And they're used to, like, when they want to know an answer, like, I mean, like I'm older, right? Like I'm 40, right? And it's like, I remember going through school and being like, you have to do math and show your work. And why? Well, you just do, because, and I thought to myself, well, that's weird, because if I'm using a calculator now, aren't I going to be using a calculator later on when I'm an adult? Right. And so they're like, no, you got to show it by hand. Now nobody does that, man. Like, you wouldn't believe how often my kids are sitting here, they're reading their homework, and they'll just be like, they'll see a word that they don't know, and they'll be like, Alexa, define elaboration. And Alexa will give them the answer, right? So anyway, so a lot of kind of going back to your question, a lot of guys, when they come from divorced parents or divorced families in general, what you'll see is an overcompensation from both sides of parenting. Dad wants them to know that they're loved and taken care of and so forth, and so does mom. And sometimes they actually war with one another if they don't have a good or healthy relationship. And so mom will try to give more to their kids than what dad can give, so that they'll love them more or appreciate them more. And so it's like this war that divorced parents will go through, where they're trying to be the like coolest parent. They're trying to be the friend of their child. So instead of teaching them principles and things that are going to help them to be successful adults, they're just giving them whatever they want.
Yeah, that makes sense. I can think of many situations in my life where it was a competition, right? Parent versus, that's on the parent, 100%.
It is.
Where does setting boundaries, right? We talk about setting boundaries in all relationships, right? But specifically, parent to child. Why is it so difficult for people?
Because parents haven't resolved their childhood issues. And so they carry that into their adulting and into their parenting. And so, for example, let me give you an example. There's a really cool book by a psychologist, an Eastern Indian psychologist woman, and she's amazing. It's called The Conscious Parent, or Conscious Parenting is kind of her approach. And it's basically like, if your kid does something that sets you off, like emotionally, it angers you, it frustrates you, it makes you sad, it's because there's something in your childhood that you haven't resolved. And what your child is doing in their innocence is triggering that emotional response in you, right? So let me give you an example. You've heard the phrase, don't cry over spilt milk, right? Like, milk used to be delivered by hand by the milkman, and he'd come and he'd put it in the doorstep or knock on the door and hand people their milk. So it was kind of a precious commodity back in the day. That's where this phrase comes from. So if you spilt milk, you were spilling out like money, right? Like, that was a resource that you were kind of wasting. Yeah. Now, once it's spilt, it's spilt. It's you can't get that back in the jar, right? So for me, if I grew up and when I spilt milk, my parents chastised me or got angry with me or spanked me or told me that, like, hey, dummy, don't spill the milk or something like that. I would say, okay, my brain would say as a kid, spilling milk is bad. I am bad if I spill milk, right? Or a box of cereal or whatever. This is just an example. So I would probably carry that into my adulthood and basically continue to pass on what my parents had taught me, that spilling milk was bad and it was wrong. And so if my kids spilled milk, it would probably trigger me emotionally to get upset and angry. And so the conscious parenting part comes in and goes, wait a second, instead of getting mad at my kid, let me recognize and let me be mindful of how I'm feeling and go, what is it about spilling milk that is triggering me? Because it's got to be something that I haven't resolved myself. Right? Kids don't like purposefully go around spilling milk most of the time. They're not trying to piss you off and make you angry, but it does trigger that in us, And so that's kind of like a rule of thumb. If your child is doing something that sets you off or makes you upset or whatever, it's something that you haven't resolved. So instead of getting mad at your kid and continuing to perpetuate that cycle of anger over spilled food, say, what can I do differently?
Yeah, that's self-awareness.
Yeah, self-awareness, mindfulness. And it really is. It really is. And we do it like on a subconscious level, Chris. Like we don't know how often we do that,
Healing your inner child is so crucial to your development. And obviously it's crucial to, your parenting as well. I've spent a lot of time, I worked over the past year or so, I've been working with Rachel Fiari and her group over at Master of Self University. And one of their biggest components of their program and how they do is inner child work, right? Healing
Absolutely.
shit that is deep within you, right? And it's wild because if you don't even know sometimes that it's something from a childhood, but when you go back and you actually, drop in your heart and understand where that pain is coming from, and you love it, appreciate it, and can deal with it, you show up differently in your life, right?
You really
And
do.
self-awareness alone, that skill, is something that many people lack. They're the first people to point the finger at someone else, right? They take no personal accountability for their development and what they bring out into the world, And in business, it's like I have seen, now that I run two businesses, the self-awareness for the people around me and what they're doing has amplified 100%, right? Because if you have no self-awareness into what you're doing, how can you lead men and women to a greater mission, right?
Absolutely.
And so
Absolutely.
for you, I'm going to flip it on its head real quick with what you're doing with Forte Strong. Explain to me how your team has kind of came together to craft what it is now, right? Because when it first started, it's not what it is now, and I know that for a fact. So explain the evolution of that and kind of how that I guess grew to what it is now.
Yeah. So we really had to break the mold. And, my background isn't in psychology. It's actually in business, but there are so many business books that talk about the psychology of the employee, the psychology of the entrepreneur, the psychology of relationships. And so it actually was like a really easy transition for me to come over because I love that coaching and mentoring aspect. If you look at the evolution of our program, what we wanted to do when we first got started is I didn't want to be like all of the other treatment centers or treatment programs. Because what you'd see affluent parents just say, here's my adult kid, just deal with them, take care of them. I need a break, right? And so these programs would just warehouse these young adults and they weren't progressing. They weren't learning how to be independent. They were just having all their needs taken care of. They had their food taken care of. They were told when they needed to wake up, when they went to go to bed. Here's a structure. Here's a structure that probably parents didn't provide for you. And now I am, and I just get comfortable, right? So there's a book that we started using early on called Strength Finders. And in Strengths Finder, I think they've analyzed over like 30 years of Gallup polls of over 20 million individuals. And they've been able to categorize 34 different innate strengths that we all have. And when we started utilizing this first for our employees and then for our young adult men to get an idea of what your top strengths were, we came to find out really, really quickly that our strengths are our biggest weaknesses as well. Okay. So let me give you an example of that. My biggest strength is strategy, right? I'm very strategic. Like I said before, I learned how to problem solve at a very young age. And that's very helpful. But for somebody who's as strategic as I am, what I can do is I can actually get so caught up in the planning that I fail to actually execute, right? And it's like, man, I've got so many cool, research papers or journal articles or whatever, and I want to incorporate all this, and my brain is thinking about how to, use this in my life or improve other people's lives, and I just don't execute it, right? What we started seeing for most of our guys that were coming through, adaptability was one of their top strengths. So you can go by and you can take the Strength Finder test, and it will give you your top 5 strengths in order from 1 to 5. And we started seeing this adaptability. And I'm like, well, adaptability, if you think about that, that's kind of like a cool strength to have, right? Sure. Like I would love to be able to adapt, right? The Marine Corps motto, improvise, adapt, and overcome, right? My gun's not working. Okay, what do I got to do to improvise, adapt, and overcome to accomplish the mission? But the downside to adaptability is I'm just going to sit and coast, right? I'm going to get so comfortable with whatever my lifestyle is or looks like or whatever, that I'm just going to do barely enough to get by without drawing too much attention to me, so that I don't have too much responsibility. I don't have too much stuff to deal with. So we started seeing that adaptability, and we're like, okay, guys are going to get comfortable really quick. So we need to develop some sort of a process or some sort of a curriculum that will continue to push them, right? But not in a way that's overwhelming, because if you do it in a way that's overwhelming and seems impossible, you talk about SMART goals, right? Specific, measurable, those kind of goals. It's like, it can't be so overwhelming that it exceeds their ability and their skill set to achieve. Tony Robbins talks about this a lot, right? He says that we make decisions based on 2 factors in our life, and that's to seek pleasure or to avoid pain. And we will always try to avoid pain more than we will seek pleasure. That will always trump anything that we do. And so what these guys were doing is they were like saying, I'm going to do whatever I have to avoid discomfort. And so instead, and so what he says is, Tony Robbins says, the best way to keep people moving forward, keep that momentum, right? An object, physics, right? Sir Isaac Newton, an object in motion tends to stay in motion.
Right.
And Tony Robbins says, we see that through results. We see that through successes. And so we started to develop a curriculum where they could start to see these like micro results right away.
Evidence breeds confidence. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Totally. And so that's what we did our curriculum around. We didn't want to warehouse these guys. We wanted them to be contributing in society, being good members of their family and of their community, getting an education, contributing to the workforce, whatever that looked like for them. And so our program was designed, and we always stuck to this, around 6 months. Now, guys are typically in our program on site for 6 to 9 months, but the curriculum is set up that if guys are really, really motivated, they can push through it and graduate our program within 6 months.
So you mentioned you didn't want to be like a regular program, right? And to do that, you need to see you as on the executive side of things, need to see results. You need these men to come in here, live better, and actually be a contributing member to society. Talk to me about why your program is different and that curriculum specifically, right? You mentioned, what you're trying to accomplish, but why are you seeing the results in these young men? What is it that you guys are specifically doing that you think is the biggest separator between you and any other program in the country?
So there's 2 parts to that, 2 answers to that question. The first thing is a change in environment. Okay. If you're around the same people in the same habitat with the same, dynamics, you're going to not, see a lot of change, right? You get comfortable within your own family. We're big into family systems theory, right? That everybody plays a role within a family. For mom, it's typically the nurturer, right? Sometimes she'll over coddle the kids. For dad, it's like, I'm the breadwinner and I'm kind of the critical parent, and I'm going to be a little bit harder on you, and I'm going to be the enforcer of the rules of the house. And for siblings, sometimes it's like, I'm the annoying one, or I'm the smart one, or I'm the happy one, whatever it is. We all have our own different role. Um, and so we're kind of big in understanding like what that is. But if you're in a different environment with new people and new opportunities, your brain literally has to bypass these, neural pathways that it's accustomed to. And we refer to that as psychological disruption. And so part of it is just changing your environment, right? If I was just to coach somebody one-on-one and they're like, man, I have trouble being motivated. I have trouble engaging with my peers. I have trouble not playing video games so much. It's like, well, then let's change your freaking environment, man. That might look like moving, or that might look like going into your pantry and completely throwing away all your junk food so that you don't have access to junk food, right? You're going to start to eat healthier. It's going to psychologically disrupt the neural pathways that you've developed that are so ingrained, so thick and prevalent in your process. And so getting them out of that environment, that's why they come here from all over the country and all over the world on site to my program in Southern Utah, because it's a change of environment, right? I mean, there's red rocks and palm trees and arches around here. And so, we get people from like the Midwest or something, and they're like, I feel like I freaking landed on Mars. Like there's no big trees everywhere, like there are on the East Coast or whatever.
Is it as simple as just changing the environment? Like if you were to just change the environment alone, would that make that much of a difference?
Yes and no. I would say that it's 50%. I would say that just to change the environment is half of the battle. The next half is more of the minutia. It's more of the detailed things, right? So the next half is, like you said, let's learn about your environment growing up. Let's learn about your childhood. What are some negative patterns that you've developed in your lifestyle, right? What are some limiting beliefs that you are holding on to that are preventing you from moving forward and being more successful? What are, the emotional attachments that you have to things that aren't serving you anymore, right? And so that's the other half of things. That's the other half of let's engage in things that we know are clinically tried and proven to produce more serotonin release in the body, a reduction in cortisol, healthier circadian rhythm. So you're getting the sleep that you need to, so that your brain is resetting chemically like it's supposed to every single night. Your cells are repairing and regenerating. You're waking up fresh with more energy and more vigor and more excitement about life. You're engaging with peers in a way that is like, producing endorphins and helping you like see the world through a different lens, right? If I talk to you, Chris, there's so much I can learn from you based on your experience in life and what you've seen. And it can help shape me to be a little bit more open to the success that you've had. And maybe I can follow that success to find my own personal success.
Yeah, that's really good. So let's talk success rate. When people come to your program, what does that look like? What have you seen over the past 15 years?
Yeah. So we've seen, my goal has always been, I want to just completely demolish the existing standard for mental and behavioral health treatment. So for example, with most residential treatment centers, like if you see an 8% success rate, like that's pretty good. That's pretty decent, right? Some are higher, some are lower. Because, for example, you take somebody who is dealing with substance abuse, that becomes an addiction, right? And the recidivism rate, or in other words, people who come back to that program because they relapse, it's pretty high, right? And so I wanted to develop a program or a system that was long lasting and permanent, where guys weren't coming back to my program. And so I realized that what I had to do is create a program that was very, very similar to what they would experience by being on their own in the real world, being independent, taking care of themselves. Because I wanted our program to be that last stepping stone into full independence and have that, like, everything that they were learning, just retain that for the rest of their lives. So my program mirrors what they will see and parallels what they will see in the real world very closely. So all of my guys drive scooters, right? Because if you're not mobile, you're not truly independent, right? So all of my guys drive scooters so they can get to appointments on time. They can get to work. They can engage in social activities. My office is separate from where they live. So they live in townhomes. Now, one of my businesses owns the townhomes, owns those properties, but it's separate. So they get part-time jobs. They shop for themselves. They learn how to cook for themselves. We have cleaning inspections, so they know how to clean, right? They can say, this is the basic standard of what a clean living environment looks like. This is the basic standard of how I can provide meals for myself, right? To keep myself full and hungry and healthy. So we allow them to go out into the real world and try things and experiment with what they're learning here, either through therapy or through their experiential education here. And if they fail, right, they can always fall back on the structure that our program provides. But we're encouraging them to go out, to fail forward, to make mistakes, right? Because there's two things that we learn from in our life. It's our successes and our mistakes. And it's our mistakes that is usually the better teacher, right? Because if we do something dumb and it's like, oh crap, like I don't want to have that emotional experience again, I'm most likely going to, develop other patterns or behaviors or thoughts that are going to prevent me from falling into those mistakes again.
Dude, that's awesome. That's so impactful. I remember when we first had a conversation about it. We were at dinner, and I heard you mention it. And I was like, "This is amazing!" Like you just don't hear it. Like traditional Western medicine therapy and rehab center. It's so many people go back because you're not changing the environment. You're forcing someone into this box, and then when they complete the requirements, you send them back to their environment that got them there in the first place. Mm-hmm. So what is it they are actually changing outside of putting handcuffs on them and putting them in a box?
Exactly.
But just emotionally speaking. And what you're doing is amazing. Dude, what's the next thing happening? Like how are you guys going to take this to the next level?
So what we're doing right now is we are creating a really robust online coaching program for parents. Okay. Really, truly, yes, for parents. Because like you said before, there's a lot of what the parents have done that's contributed to their son failing to launch. Whether that's a parent who is not present enough in their life, who didn't have the skill set themselves to teach their kid how to be independent, or whatever it is. And like it costs a lot to come to my program, right? Because it's a lot. Like we do a lot. We do a lot of activities. We have a highly certified staff, right? I have 3 psychotherapists that work for us that are probably the best therapists when it comes to failure to launch in the country, as far as I'm concerned. We're continuously providing, new opportunities and growth and really pushing and pioneering understanding of this failure to launch syndrome. But there are parents who can't afford our program. And I always, as a kid, like I said, who was drinking powdered milk, my parents never bought me Jordans or Nikes or whatever because we couldn't afford it, right? Like I was going to Payless to get shoes and whatever. And not saying that didn't, teach me things as I was growing up, but like I've always kind of wanted more, and I've always wanted people to be able to achieve and have more, right? And not have that deprivation mentality, because the world really is an abundant place if we know how to work with it. Yeah. And so I really want to continue to help parents who can't afford my program. And yeah, maybe they're more of that DIY or they can't afford it or whatever. But I know that over the last 15 years, we've created such and we've been documenting, like we've done case studies. I've been like, what type of families, like you said before, it was a really great question. Like, of the guys that come through my program, is it a majority of them come from divorced households? Is it a majority of them come from affluent households? Is it a majority of them are they abused, growing up? Like whatever it was, I was always trying to find what is the key thing that contributes to failure to launch? What's the cause of it, right? And what we found is there are a lot of different things that contribute to failure to launch. And we've really tried to package that into a comprehensive approach for parents, because the people, when we look back and we look at the success of our students here, the guys who are the most successful come from households where their parents are growing themselves, okay? Where their parents are holding healthy boundaries. They're looking at them in the mirror and saying, wow, like what have I done to contribute to my son's failure to launch issue? And how can I improve myself? And so it's parents who are on board, who are supporting our curriculum, who are invested into themselves. And that's the success we see. And so it's an online parenting program, right? We're still kind of doing some of the finalization for the filming of that, because we're going to have videos associated with specific principles and key things, key takeaways for parents to learn. But just by watching the first video, I guarantee they're going to be able to see changes immediately within their family, within their household.
Do you guys have plans for opening up other locations around the country? Like, what is that? Is that like a 5-year plan? Like, what are you guys thinking there?
Yeah, it's got to be a very specific location for us, because like I said, all of our guys are mobile. And so it has to be in a location where there's no snow, right? Like I said, I live in a place that's the high mountain desert. It's really beautiful here, but we got palm trees and really mild winters, so they can get around and be mobile. So it's got to be in a place that would do that. Is it in the near future? No. Is it in the future? Yes. But I think to really kind of capitalize the hold that we have in this niche in the marketplace, it's going to be the online component, because we're going to be able to penetrate that market and address that need a lot deeper for parents who are like, okay, well, give me some info, man. Just give me some help. Because when we get calls from parents, they're at their wits' end. They're just like, I've done everything. I've tried to pay for my son's college. I've paid for tutoring. He's in therapy. I've hired a life coach. He has a car that I pay for. He has a cell phone. Like, he has all the resources he needs to be successful, but he's not. Like, they're just at their wits' end. And they're like, what do I do? And so it's really an adjustment of mindset on the parents' end that's going to help their son to be more successful. And that's going to be things like, let us teach you how to set healthy boundaries. Because one thing that parents fail to recognize is when their child becomes an adult, your approach has to change, right? I'm going to approach parenting a 20-year-old way different than I'm going to be approaching a 12-year-old.
Right.
And so we teach them how to adjust that relationship so that they're not continuing to be the person who their child is dependent on. It's like, like our relationship's going to change in that I'm going to require that you talk to me more as an adult, right? You interact with me more as an adult. You are more responsible for things, even if you are still living at home. How can I introduce, higher levels of responsibility for you? So it's going to be very comprehensive and touch on all those things so that parents can like have success with their late teens and their young adults right away.
Yeah, that's amazing, man. And so you guys are in the process of developing that right now?
Correct.
Awesome. So, Matt, as we wrap up, there's a couple things. One, how do people, in what ways, if possible, can people get involved into Forte Strong and help drive your mission forward, either with the kids or with the parents? Like, if someone's like, how can I contribute? What would that look like?
To be honest with you, it would be just spread the word. Spread the word that there is a program out there that helps young adult men who are failing to launch. Every time that we get a call, not every time, but most of the time, parents are like, holy crap, everything that I read on your website is my son to a T. Like, Chris, we've been doing this for so long. We've developed like archetypes for the young men that come in. We know exactly, like almost exactly how long he's going to take in the program. We know what our approach is going to be therapeutically or just experientially. We know how to best kind of like talk with that young man so that he'll be able to retain the principles that we're learning. We'll know how to develop rapport very quickly with him based on him and his family dynamic. Like, there is a program out there and it's very, very specific. We're not dealing with guys who are currently, dealing with substance abuse or have a history of acting out violently or sexually, or who have severe psychological issues. Like, they've got to be a good match. And we have a selection process to get into our program, but just spread the word, like, please, because all of us know somebody. It might be our brother. It might be our next door neighbor. It might be a grandson or a nephew. All of us know somebody who is sitting at home on the couch playing video games all day long and not being successful, right? They're not working. They're not interacting with their peers in a social and healthy way. They are isolating. And, just like anything, any skill set that we have in life, whether it's sales or communication or whatever, needs to be practiced and needs to be, done on a regular basis, or you will lose that skill set.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Like, you know, it's, we've talked about a lot of stuff today. And I'm super happy we did. Really impactful. I know when we first spoke, we hit it off and talked about really some deep things. And it's important to know there's a couple things that I took away from talking to you is one, as adults, whether you're a parent or not, you have to have the willingness to improve yourself. You got to have that self awareness that you're not perfect, and what you're contributing to relationships is solely on you and no one else, right? And so to have that accountability, self awareness is really big. For parents, is to actually make an effort, right, to help your child develop and not coddle them, and actually give them the life skills that are going to give them a chance to succeed in this world, right? And it's only getting crazier by the day, right? So as we wrap up, Matt, is there anything on your heart that you want to share, that you have a message for people related to your business, unrelated, anything of that nature?
Yeah. So what I would say is what I want to communicate to people is the most impactful place for relationships to flourish and for people to start to be independent and successful is in the home. It's in the home. And I don't care if you're a single mom or a single dad or a grandparent who's taking care of a grandchild, or you do have a healthy relationship as a couple and you are married. There is no amount of worldly success that can compensate for failure in the home. So as a parent, please be involved with your child. Do your best. That's all they really want, right? Like your child just wants time, right? I don't care if they're 23. I don't care if they're 12. I don't care if they're 2 years old. Like you putting time into having a relationship with your child is going to be the best way to start. And if I could just kind of dig in and just give one more really great piece of just a gem that's going to help a lot of parents out there, it's that I want to just talk really quick about the ego states of parenting. Okay. There's 3 ego states of parenting. And I want parents who are listening to this to kind of like, just think about this for a little bit and think about where they are. The nurturing parent, if you're the nurturing parent, you're the parent who says, I'm not okay unless my child is okay. So what do I need to do to make things comfortable for them, right? I'm kind of that helicopter parent, that lawnmower parent. Do you need food? Do you need me to wash your clothes? Do you need me to, that's a nurturing parent. On the flip side of the coin, there's the critical parent, right? And typically dads will fall into this role. And that is like, I've built my business with these 2 hands. I put myself through medical school. I have, I'm very harsh and critical because life was harsh and critical to me. And so they have a level of unrealistic expectations for their kids. And it's like, nothing you will ever do will ever meet my standard, right? That's the critical parent. The nurturing parent and the critical parent ego states create the same failure to launch result, Chris. Because parents who are over nurturing, their kid goes, all I need to do is make my parent more uncomfortable than me, and they'll step in and intervene and take care of things for me. And the critical parent is, nothing I'm going to do is ever going to meet the expectations of my parent, so I'm not even going to try. So both of those parenting ego states create the same failure to launch result, right? Where you want to be is right in the middle, and that's the adult ego state. The adult ego state is providing unconditional positive regard for your child, unconditional emotional support without stepping in and enabling, right? Enabling by definition is doing something for somebody that they can do themselves. So just consider that, parents, or if you want to have kids, you're young and you're going to have kids in the future. Am I a nurturing parent? Am I a critical parent? Or am I an adult parent? Am I a parent who's teaching my kids valuable skill sets, allowing them to hit the developmental benchmarks that they need so that by the time they are 18, they can be successful because they have a good foundation underneath them?
Kids are our future, man. Kids are our future, and we need to have more people that are spreading the message and leaving an impact for our youth. Matt, thank you so much for sharing this. What you and the whole team are doing to make an impact with young adults is remarkable, and I'm blessed and thankful that you gave me some of your time today. I'll drop this link on how you can check out what they're doing at Forte Strong and spread the message as much as possible. Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Chris.